I had exactly $214 in my personal checking account the morning my husband slid those papers across our kitchen island and told me to sign or suffer. Not because I was broke. I want to be clear about that. I had a thriving interior architecture practice, a $2.5 million penthouse in Austin, Texas that I had purchased with my own money 3 years before I ever met him, and a partnership stake in a firm that billed $4 million a year. The $214 was what remained in the one account he knew about, the one I had quietly drained over the previous 8 weeks while moving everything else somewhere he couldn't reach. He thought he had me cornered. He thought the grief from losing my sister 6 months earlier had made me soft, distracted, easy. He thought the USB drive he had found in my nightstand drawer contained financial records he could use as leverage. It didn't. But I let him believe it did. He pushed the papers toward me with 2 fingers, the way you'd push something unpleasant across a table, and he said, "Sign it, Nadia. Walk away clean. Or I drag this out for 2 years, and you spend every dollar you have on attorneys." I picked up the pen. I signed. And then I placed my keys on top of the papers, picked up my coat, and walked out of the penthouse without looking back. 48 hours later, his own attorney called him in a voice I am told could be heard from the hallway outside the office. She said, "Do you have any idea what you just agreed to? Let me take you back to where this all started. My name is Nadia Osei. I am 41 years old. I am a licensed interior architect and the founding partner of Osei plus Ward Design Studio in Austin, Texas. I specialize in high-end residential and boutique hospitality spaces. I have been doing this work since I was 26 years old, when I took out a personal loan and rented a shared office in East Austin with a woman named Priya Ward, who is still my business partner and still the most organized human being I have ever met. I am, by nature, a builder. I think in terms of structure, load-bearing walls, what holds weight and what only appears to. That instinct has served me professionally for 15 years. It took me a little longer to apply it to people. I met Garrett Holloway at a client dinner in the spring 4 years ago. He was there as a guest of the project developer, a man named Curtis, who had commissioned us to redesign the interiors of a boutique hotel in South Congress. Garrett sat across from me at a long table, said very little, and when he did speak, it was precise and considered. He was a commercial real estate broker. He was 44. He had been divorced once, no children, and he carried himself with the kind of quiet confidence that I, at 37, found genuinely attractive after a decade of loud men with large personalities and very little follow-through. We dated for 14 months before we married. It was a small ceremony, just family and close friends, at a vineyard outside Fredericksburg. My sister Amara was my maid of honor. She wore yellow because I told her she could wear whatever she wanted, and yellow was her color. She danced for 3 hours straight and gave a toast that made half the room cry. Amara died 11 months into my marriage. Brain aneurysm. She was 38 years old and had never had a headache in her life until the one that didn't stop. She was gone within 72 hours of her first symptom. I am not going to spend a long time on that part of the story because some things resist narrative. But I will tell you this. When Amara died, she left me everything she had. Her savings, her car, her apartment furnishings, and the one thing that mattered most. Our grandmother's jewelry collection. 7 pieces. A gold cuff bracelet our grandmother had worn every day for 40 years. A set of coral earrings from Nigeria that had been in our family for 3 generations. A pearl and diamond ring our grandfather had commissioned for their 50th wedding anniversary, and 4 other pieces each tied to a specific memory, a specific person, a specific moment in a family history that existed long before I was born. Amara had kept the collection in a velvet-lined box in her closet. When I brought it home after settling her estate, I placed it in the small fireproof safe I kept in the walk-in closet of my penthouse master bedroom. 3 months after Amara's funeral, I noticed the coral earrings were missing. I told myself I had moved them. I searched the safe 3 times, searched the bedroom, searched everywhere a person searches when they don't yet want to admit what they already know. 2 weeks later, I noticed the gold cuff bracelet was also gone. I didn't say anything to Garrett. I watched. Here is what I knew about Garrett Holloway by that point in our marriage. He was charming, organized, and financially comfortable on paper. He had a real estate license in good standing, a respectable client list, and a reputation in Austin's commercial property community as reliable and well-connected. He had contributed fairly to our household expenses for the first year of our marriage. He had been attentive in the ways that matter, remembered things, showed up when he said he would, treated my work with visible respect. What I had not fully understood until Amara's death began to rearrange my attention was this. Garrett operated in what I can only describe as a parallel financial reality. He maintained the surface appearance of prosperity while quietly managing a web of obligations, debts, and arrangements that he kept completely separate from anything he shared with me. When grief stripped away my social energy and I began spending more time at home, I started to see the edges of things. A phone call he took in the garage. A bank statement he closed on his laptop when I walked in. A property deal he mentioned once and then never again. I did not confront him. I am not, by temperament, a confrontational person. I am an architect. I look at his face and I ask, what is actually holding this up? So I started looking. The first thing I found was a name. In Garrett's email, which I accessed using a password I had noticed him type months earlier and filed away without fully intending to use it, I found a thread with a woman named Cassandra Vale. The emails were professional in tone. They discussed properties, commission splits, a transaction involving a commercial building in Round Rock. But the thread went back 14 months, and buried in the middle of it was a short exchange that stopped me cold. She had written, "When are you going to tell her?" He had written back, "When the timing is right. Just be patient." Patient about what? I did not know yet, but I forwarded the thread to a private email account I created that same evening on a device Garrett had never seen, a second-hand iPad I had purchased with cash from a resale shop in North Loop. I want to tell you about the USB drive, because it matters. My sister Amara had been meticulous about her personal records. When I was settling her estate, I found a USB drive in the small fireproof box she kept under her bed, alongside her will and insurance documents. The drive contained her financial records, a personal journal she kept in simple text documents, and one folder she had labeled simply with my name. Inside that folder was a single document. It was a screenshot of a LinkedIn profile. The profile belonged to a man named Garrett Holloway. But it was not my husband's profile. It was an older, archived version, captured and saved by my sister approximately 2 years before I met him. In it, Garrett listed a different employer, a different city, and a different professional history than the one I knew. He had been based in Houston, not Austin. He had worked not as a commercial broker, but as a development consultant for a firm called Holloway Capital Partners, which appeared to have dissolved in 2018 following what a brief online search revealed were significant financial irregularities. He had a different professional headshot. Slightly younger. Same eyes. At the bottom of the document, in Amara's handwriting, she had written a single line. She had printed the document and written on it, and then scanned it back into the folder. The line read, "I don't trust him." I looked him up. This is not who he says he is. Show this to a lawyer before things go further. She had found this before I married him. She had saved it. She had never shown it to me. I sat with that for a long time. My sister had been trying to protect me. She had gathered this quietly, the way I would have, because we were raised by the same woman and we approached problems the same way. And then she had died before she could tell me. The USB drive sat under her bed for 1.5 years, waiting. I put the USB drive in my nightstand drawer, not to hide it, because I needed it close while I figured out what to do next. 2 weeks later, Garrett found it. He didn't tell me he had found it. He told me he was working late. But I had installed a small monitoring application on our home network router, a tool a technology consultant friend had shown me for tracking device activity, and I could see that at 9:47 on a Tuesday evening, someone had accessed our home Wi-Fi from inside the Penthouse and conducted 3 rapid searches. The first was for Holloway Capital Partners. The second was for the Houston commercial real estate fraud case from 2018. The third was for my name alongside the words, "Separate Property Texas." He was checking what I knew. And he was checking whether the penthouse was vulnerable. I called Priya that night. Not my attorney, not yet. Priya, because she is the person I call when I need to think out loud with someone who will not panic and will not let me panic. He's been living a constructed identity, I told her. I don't know the full shape of it yet, but my sister knew something was wrong 2 years before I married him, and she left me the evidence. Priya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you know a good family law attorney?" I did not, but Priya did. Her name was Constance Adeyemi, and she had been practicing family law in Travis County for 19 years. We met in her office on a Thursday morning, and I put everything I had on her conference table: the USB drive contents, the email thread with Cassandra Vale, the network search records, the missing jewelry, the LinkedIn discrepancy, the Holloway Capital Partners dissolution records I had pulled from the Texas Secretary of State database. Constance looked at everything carefully and without visible reaction, which I found reassuring. Then she said, "There are several things happening here simultaneously, and we need to separate them. First, the penthouse. Walk me through the ownership history. The penthouse at 400 West 5th Street, Unit 2804, had been purchased by me in the spring, 3 years before I met Garrett. Using a combination of savings and proceeds from the sale of a smaller property I had owned since my late 20s. The purchase was made in my name alone. The mortgage, which I had paid off 18 months before our wedding, had been solely in my name. I had never added Garrett to the deed. Texas is a community property state, Constance said, which means assets acquired during the marriage are generally considered jointly owned. But separate property, meaning property you owned before the marriage, retains its separate character as long as it hasn't been commingled. Have you ever used marital funds to pay expenses on the penthouse? Renovations, assessments, utilities paid from a joint account. I thought about it carefully. We had done one significant renovation in the second year of our marriage, a kitchen remodel that Garrett had insisted on and that had been paid from our joint account. $47,000. Constance nodded slowly. That creates a reimbursement claim on his side. It doesn't transform the property into community property, but it gives him a number to argue with. The good news is, Texas has a strong framework for protecting separate property if you can document the original acquisition, which it sounds like you can. We spent the next 2 hours building a strategy. It was not dramatic. It was methodical. It was exactly the kind of conversation I am built for. Over the following 6 weeks, Constance and I worked carefully and without alerting Garrett to anything. She filed what is called a partition and exchange agreement through a series of technical amendments that reclassified the penthouse formally and unambiguously as my separate property, acknowledging Garrett's reimbursement claim for the renovation at its precise dollar value, $47,000, and offsetting it against documented contributions I had made to joint expenses during the marriage that exceeded his by $214,000. The net result was that any claim Garrett could make against the penthouse was reduced to a number that was, legally speaking, a rounding error. Constance also helped me establish a revocable living trust. The penthouse was transferred into the trust. I was the sole trustee and sole beneficiary. The trust had been in place for 4 weeks before Garrett found the USB drive and started searching. Meanwhile, I had retained a private investigator. His name was Dennis Falk, a former Travis County investigator who had spent the last 11 years doing civil work. I gave him the LinkedIn discrepancy, the Holloway Capital Partners dissolution, and the name Cassandra Vale. What he found over the following 3 weeks required its own folder. Garrett Holloway had indeed worked in Houston under a slightly different professional identity. Holloway Capital Partners had been dissolved after an SEC complaint involving undisclosed conflicts of interest in a series of commercial property transactions. Garrett had not been formally charged, but 2 of his business partners had, and the dissolution had been the result of a negotiated agreement with regulators. He had relocated to Austin in 2019, re-established his broker's license under a clean record because the SEC matter had resulted in no criminal findings, and carefully rebuilt his professional reputation. Cassandra Vale was a commercial real estate attorney in Houston. She and Garrett had been in a relationship for 3 years before his move to Austin. According to Dennis's investigation, they had never fully ended that relationship. Cassandra had a key to a short-term rental property Garrett maintained in Houston under an LLC called HCV Holdings, a name that combined his initials with hers. The LLC had been registered in Delaware in 2020, 1 year after his move to Austin and 2 years before our wedding. HCV Holdings owned 2 properties, one in Houston, one in the Buda area just south of Austin, a 4-bedroom house that Garrett had described to me as a client investment property he managed on a consulting basis. Dennis provided photographs. Cassandra Vale at the Buda property. Cassandra Vale and Garrett at a restaurant in the Domain, 8 months after our wedding. Cassandra Vale wearing, on her right wrist in a photograph dated 3 months after Amara's funeral, a gold cuff bracelet that matched my grandmother's in every visible detail. I set the photographs face down on my kitchen counter and stood very still for about 2 minutes. Then I picked up my phone and called Dennis back. "I need everything on HCV Holdings," I said. "Every filing, every transaction, every asset. And I need to know if any marital funds were used anywhere in that structure." They had been. Not much, but enough. Garrett had transferred $18,000 from our joint account in 3 separate transactions over 14 months, describing them in our records as professional development expenses and a real estate licensing course. The money had gone into HCV Holdings' operating account. Dennis found the wire records. That was the second folder, and it changed everything. Constance reviewed the HCV Holdings documentation and straightened in her chair in a way I had not seen her do before. "This is fraud," she said simply. "Diverting marital funds into a concealed asset structure is fraud. It also exposes him to a claim for waste of community property. In Texas, when a spouse fraudulently conceals assets or diverts marital funds for their own benefit, the court can award the defrauded spouse up to 100% of the value of those assets as a remedy. We're not just protecting your penthouse anymore. We're building an affirmative case." She paused. "There's one more thing I want to explore. The jewelry." We discussed the missing pieces carefully. I had documentation for the jewelry's provenance through Amara's estate filing, which listed each piece with estimated values and photographs. I had photographs of my grandmother wearing the gold cuff bracelet, photographs of Amara wearing the coral earrings at family events, decades of visual documentation that established the collection as inherited family property with clear sentimental and monetary value. Dennis's photograph of Cassandra wearing the cuff bracelet was, Constance noted, potentially actionable as conversion of property. "I want to file a police report," I told her. "Not yet," she said. "We file when the moment is most useful. Right now, let's let Garrett believe he still has the advantage." He did believe that. I watched him believe it over the following 2 weeks with a clarity that was almost clinical. He became more relaxed, more certain of himself. He started conversations about the divorce he hadn't technically initiated yet, framing them as reasonable discussions about fair division. He was laying groundwork, preparing me psychologically to accept whatever number his attorney would eventually present. One evening he said, "You know, I've always respected what you've built here, Nadia. I just think we both deserve a fresh start, and that means being honest about what's shared and what isn't." I said, "I agree completely." He smiled. He thought that was progress. What I was actually doing during those 2 weeks was removing items from the penthouse. Not secretly, not dramatically. I simply began, as part of what I described to Garrett as a general reorganization, transferring certain personal items, documents, and irreplaceable belongings to a storage unit I had rented in my name only. My grandmother's remaining jewelry pieces. My architectural drawings and original project files. Personal photographs. Documents related to my firm. Everything that I would need and that I did not want to navigate a dispute over. I also transferred my personal savings, retirement accounts, and business accounts into structures that Constance had reviewed and confirmed were protected as my separate property under Texas law. The joint account, which held a modest operating balance for household expenses, I left untouched. It was, at the point when Garrett served me with divorce papers on a Tuesday morning, the most accessible liquid asset in my name. The service of the papers was Garrett's opening move, and it was calibrated to feel like a shock. He had timed it for a morning when he knew I had a major client presentation, when I would be distracted and already under pressure. His attorney, a man named Pierce Rutledge who had a reputation in Austin family law for aggressive tactics and extended litigation timelines, had filed simultaneously in Travis County District Court. I read the filing that evening. It was, from a legal strategy standpoint, a comprehensive opening. It claimed entitlement to 50% of the penthouse value based on community property arguments and the kitchen renovation. It claimed 50% of my partnership stake in Osei plus Ward, arguing that the firm's growth during the marriage had been fueled by community assets. It sought spousal maintenance for a period of 3 years. And it included a motion for a temporary restraining order preventing me from transferring or encumbering any assets pending the divorce. The TRO motion was the dangerous one, or it would have been if Constance had not already anticipated it. She had filed our partition agreement and the trust documentation 2 weeks earlier, and those filings predated the TRO motion. The penthouse transfer was already complete. The TRO had nothing to restrain. Pierce Rutledge called Constance the morning after filing. I was told the conversation was professional, but that he was not entirely pleased. He had expected to lock down assets that were no longer available to lock. Then came the period that I think of as the performance. Garrett escalated. Not loudly, but methodically. He began making statements to mutual acquaintances, framed carefully as concern, about my mental state following Amara's death. He suggested to our shared social circle that grief had made me irrational, that I was making decisions I would regret. He was constructing a narrative in which I was unstable, and he was the patient, reasonable party. I did not correct this publicly. I let it build. I understood what he was doing because it was structurally familiar to me. He was establishing a public impression that would make his eventual demands seem more plausible. The fragile, grieving widow making impulsive financial decisions. The steady, experienced broker trying to reach a fair resolution. It was, I have to say, well executed. If I had not spent my career thinking about how surfaces can be used to suggest things that aren't true, I might have found it destabilizing. Instead, I found it clarifying. The public set piece arrived without planning, the way the most significant moments often do. Amara had been involved with a nonprofit arts organization called the East Side Cultural Collective, a group that supported working artists and musicians in Austin's East Side neighborhoods. 6 weeks after Garrett filed for divorce, the collective held its annual memorial fundraising gala, an event Amara had helped organize for 3 years running. They had asked me to attend in her honor and to say a few words about her work with the organization. I had agreed months before the divorce filing. I was not going to cancel. Garrett was not invited. He had never been involved with the collective. He had met Amara precisely 4 times before her death. But somehow he appeared at the gala. I noticed him when I was at the reception table, speaking with the collective's executive director, a woman named May Okafor who had been Amara's closest friend in the organization. He was standing near the bar in a corner of the room, in a suit I recognized, speaking to 2 men I knew slightly from Austin's commercial real estate community. May noticed me noticing him. She leaned close and said quietly, "Do you want me to have someone ask him to leave?" "No," I said. "Let him stay." She looked at me for a moment. "You sure?" "Yes," I said. "I'm sure." What I had not told May, what I had not told anyone in that room except Priya, who was standing 6 feet away watching me carefully, was that Dennis Falk had been in contact with me 2 hours before the gala with a development I had been waiting for. He had located Cassandra Vale. Not in Houston. In Austin. She had relocated to Austin 3 weeks after Garrett filed for divorce, and she was currently staying at the Buddha property, the one owned by HCV Holdings. Dennis had spoken with her, off the record, and she had told him something that required its own conversation. Cassandra Vale had not known Garrett was married when their relationship resumed after his move to Austin. She had believed his explanation that he was separated, that the divorce was a formality, that he had simply not gotten around to filing the paperwork. When the divorce filing appeared in public records, She had looked it up, and she had discovered that the date of our marriage was not 3 months before her relationship with Garrett had resumed. It was a year and a half before. She had confronted him. He had deflected, minimized, then gone quiet. She had spent the previous 3 weeks, she told Dennis, trying to decide what to do. She had decided. Dennis handed me, outside the gala venue, a folder. Inside it was a signed affidavit from Cassandra Vale, notarized that afternoon at a UPS store in Buda. In it, she described the full timeline of her relationship with Garrett, the HCV Holdings LLC structure, the Buda property, and the gold cuff bracelet. She stated under oath that Garrett had given her the bracelet approximately 4 months after Amara's funeral, describing it as an antique piece he had found at an estate sale. She stated that upon learning it was stolen property belonging to his wife's deceased sister's estate, she was prepared to return it immediately and cooperate fully with any legal proceeding. I put the folder in my bag. I went inside. I gave my remarks about Amara, which I had written and rewritten until they were true without being overwhelming. I talked about her work with the collective, about the particular way she moved through spaces, about the yellow dress. I did not cry, because I had made a decision not to cry in public that evening, and I am, as I have said, a person who can hold things in their proper place when necessary. When I sat back down, Priya put her hand on mine and kept it there. Garrett approached me near the end of the evening, when the program had ended and people were drifting toward the exits. He came to me with a glass of wine and an expression calibrated to read as gentle. He said she would have loved this event. I said she did love it. She helped build it. He said, Nadia, I think we should talk. Really talk. I think there's a version of this where we both come out okay, and we don't have to put each other through a long legal process. I looked at him. I thought about Amara's handwriting on that printed LinkedIn page. I thought about the coral earrings. I thought about Cassandra Vale signing an affidavit in a UPS store in Buda that afternoon. I said, I agree. Have your attorney call Constance tomorrow. He looked pleased. He thought that was capitulation. 2 days later, Garrett and Pierce Rutledge arrived at Constance's office for what they believed would be a preliminary settlement discussion. Garrett had prepared, I was told later, a list of proposed terms. He was confident. He had spent weeks constructing a narrative of reasonableness and a legal argument that, on its surface, had some foundation. Constance waited until they had finished presenting their initial position. Then she laid the affidavit from Cassandra Vale on the table. She explained what it contained. She explained the HCV Holdings documentation, the wire transfers, the timeline. She presented the jewelry provenance records and photographs alongside the affidavit's description of the gold cuff bracelet. She presented Dennis Fox's investigative report as a sworn statement. Then she presented the trust documentation and the partition agreement, which had been filed, she noted calmly, 6 weeks before their TRO motion, and which made the community property claims against the Penthouse legally inert. Pierce Rutledge reviewed the documents in silence. He is, by professional reputation, a composed man. But I am told that the room went very quiet and that Garrett's expression shifted in a way that was not composure. Pierce asked for a recess. Constance gave him 30 minutes. When they returned, the conversation had changed completely in its architecture. Constance had prepared a proposed settlement agreement. It acknowledged the penthouse as my separate property in full. It acknowledged my partnership stake in Osei plus Ward as my separate property, given that the firm had been founded before the marriage and that its growth had been funded through documented business operations, not community assets. It included a claim for waste of community property based on the HCV Holdings wire transfers, totaling $18,000, for which Garrett was liable at 100% under Texas statute. It included a claim for conversion of personal property regarding the missing jewelry, with documented values. And it included a provision for Garrett to execute a quitclaim deed on any residual claims against the penthouse within 10 days of signing. In exchange, Constance offered to decline filing a formal fraud complaint with the Travis County District Attorney regarding the concealed asset structure, provided full cooperation and timely execution of all agreement terms. Pierce asked for 2 days to review with his client. Constance said 24 hours. Garrett signed the following afternoon. The divorce was finalized 11 weeks later. He received nothing beyond his personal belongings and the balance of our joint account, which, as you may recall, contained $214 on the morning he served me with papers. He was required to return the jewelry. All of it. Cassandra Vale had already surrendered the gold cuff bracelet to Dennis Falk with a handwritten note that I keep because it matters. She wrote, "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I hope you get all of it back." I did get all of it back. Every piece. The Buddha property was liquidated as part of the HCV Holdings dissolution, which followed shortly after because Cassandra had removed her name from the LLC and Garrett could not sustain the structure alone. I received a portion of those proceeds as part of the waste of community property settlement. It was not a large amount. It was the principle of the accounting that mattered. Garrett Holloway relocated to Houston within 2 months of the divorce finalization. I am told he has attempted to reestablish himself in that market. I am told it has been complicated because civil court records are public and his name now appears in several of them. Cassandra Vale remained in Austin. I did not expect to hear from her again, but approximately 3 months after the divorce, she sent a brief email through my firm's general contact address. She said she was looking for an interior architect for a small office renovation. She said she understood if I preferred not to work with her. She said she thought I should know that she had told the complete truth in her affidavit and that she had never intended to be part of something that caused harm to anyone. I referred her to a colleague I respect. 1 year later, I am sitting in the living room of the Penthouse with a glass of wine and my grandmother's gold cuff bracelet on my left wrist, which is where I wear it now every day, because I am done keeping it in a safe. The coral earrings are in a small dish on my bathroom counter, where I can see them every morning. The pearl and diamond ring is on my right hand. The remaining pieces are in a velvet box on my dresser, not locked away, not hidden, present. Priya and I expanded the studio this year. We hired 2 additional project managers and took on 3 hotel commissions in markets we had not worked in before: Phoenix, Denver, and Savannah. We are building something. We have always been building something. The marriage was a detour in the construction, not a demolition. I think about Amara often. I think about the document she saved and never showed me, the quiet protective instinct that led her to print a LinkedIn page and write 1 line in her careful handwriting. I think about how she must have waited, wondering whether to say something, worrying about what it would cost me to hear. I understand the calculation. I would have made the same one. She did not get to finish protecting me, so I had to finish it myself. Constance and I still work together on various estate and business structuring matters. She is methodical and precise and does not waste words. We are well matched. At our last meeting, she said something I have been thinking about since. She said, "The most effective legal strategy is almost always the same. Document everything before you need it. Structure everything before it's contested. And never let someone else define the terms of a fight you didn't start." I have written that down. I keep it on my desk, not framed, just a note card, because things that are true don't need frames. My father called me the week the divorce was finalized. He is 70 years old and not a sentimental man, but he said something that day that I will carry. He said, "Your grandmother built that collection piece by piece over 40 years. Every piece was a choice she made on purpose. You kept it together. That means something." It does mean something. It means that some things are worth the patience, the method, the long, careful work of protecting what cannot be replaced. Not out of anger, not out of ego, out of love for what was given and a commitment to be worthy of it. I did not seek revenge on Garrett Holloway. I sought an accurate accounting. I sought the return of what was mine and a legal record of what he had done with what wasn't. The court provided that. The documents provided that. The truth, once assembled carefully and completely, provided its own weight. He fell under the weight of it. I did not push him. I simply stopped holding him up. If you are watching this and you are in a situation where someone is telling you that you have no options, that you have already lost, that the smart move is to take the loss and walk away, I want you to say something to yourself before you believe them. I want you to ask who benefits from you believing that. I want you to find a good attorney. I want you to document everything, even the things that seem small, especially the things that seem small. I want you to remember that the law, imperfect as it is, was designed to function as a structure. And structures, when properly understood, can bear an enormous amount of weight. My sister knew something was wrong. She saved the evidence. She didn't get to finish the story. I finished it for her. 1 year later, the penthouse is quiet on Sunday mornings, and I make my coffee slowly, and the light comes through the west windows at an angle that hits the wall above the kitchen table at exactly the right time of day, and I notice that angle every time. Because I am a person who notices how light moves through spaces and what it illuminates when it arrives. Some mornings I put the bracelet on before I am fully awake. Just reach for it out of habit, because it belongs on my wrist, and my wrist belongs to me, and everything in this space, every line, every surface, every object on this table, is here because I built it, chose it, or was given it by someone who loved me. That is not a small thing. That is everything. If any part of this story lived inside something you are carrying right now, I would like to hear from you. Leave a comment below. Tell me what you would have done differently. Tell me what you are still figuring out. And if this found you at the right moment, please subscribe. There are more of us than you think, people who had to learn the architecture of their own lives from the inside out, in the middle of things falling apart. We are still building. This is Nadia from Austin, where the light this morning is doing exactly what it should, and every piece of my grandmother's jewelry is exactly where it belongs.